We're going to be talking about the Hausa states, and we're going to be talking about the Bornu part of the Kanem Bornu Empire that existed for 1,000 years. So this, even though you don't see the political mapping, this is all a part of northern and northeast Nigeria, not the Kanem part of Bornu, not to the parts north of Lake Chad, but the part right around here to the southwest of Lake Chad is still part of Nigeria. Part of this extends into Cameroon, part of it into Niger and Chad, of course. So we went from talking about Oyo and Benin and Igbo land, and now we're going up here. Historically, you see how important the location of the Hausa states were. They're right along these trade routes that go both ways, north to south, from Tunisia and Tripoli all the way down to the Atlantic coast and to Yoruba land and Igbo land and Ijaw land on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. And you can also see it sits right near the middle of this trade route that goes west to east, that goes from the gold fields of ancient Mali, known for its leader Mansa Musa, who took that famous Hajj to Mecca, the great empire of Songhai, all the way west to the kingdoms in Sudan and even to Aksum. So this is a very important historical highway of African trade, of African culture, spiritual practices, very important. And the Hausa states sit right at the middle of this. This is also the area known as the Sahel, which comes from the Arabic word for the shore. So it's where the Sahara meets the grasslands. Very important cultural highway that we're going to discuss today. One of the key cities in the Hausa states, one of the key kingdoms in the Hausa states was that of Kano. Kano is the second largest city in Nigeria. Very important city, and not the current, but the last emir of Kano was Emir Sanusi II. And I want to start with the present because it connects to the past. As we always mention in this class, you can't understand the present without understanding the past. He represents a long line of emirs from this ancient kingdom of Kano. He was deposed by the governor of Kano in 2020. He reigned from 2014 to 2020. He used to be the head of the central bank of all of Nigeria. He's a trained economist and a trained Islamic legal scholar. He gets into the position, and this story that I'm about to tell, the overall message, the overall question that we have to ask is, what is the place and the status of these traditional rulers in relation to the modern government? And how has the modern government, which took over from a colonial government, made space for traditional rulers? And how have they coexisted? And then how, when they come into conflict, who do the people back? So in the case of Sanusi II, his grandfather was Sanusi I, who was deposed by the premier of one of the regions in northern Nigeria in the 1960s. So his grandfather was deposed and his uncle was put in place as the new emir by the government in Nigeria in 1960. And he ruled all the way up until 2014. Then he passed away. Now, there was some political contesting for the office between Sanusi and his cousin, who was the son of the uncle that replaced his grandfather. Now, this is where the politics came into play. The current governor, now Nigeria is much like the United States, is much like Canada, it's a federal government. So you have the national government, and then you have 36 states in Nigeria. One of the states is the state of Kano is this its own state? Sorry, I'm getting my states mixed up. Yeah, it's its own state, Kano, right there. So the governor of Kano, so there's the Nigerian government and then the traditional government. The governor, who represents Nigeria at the time, backed Sanusi because he had a problem with the former emir. And he didn't want the former emir's son to come in, so he backed Sanusi. So Sanusi becomes the emir. Now, going back to Sanusi, and this is at the same time that he has been let go from his position as a leader of the Central Bank of Nigeria because he accused the Nigerian president and others of financial mismanagement. And then they, in turn, accused him of financial mismanagement. So there was a whole lot of back and forth. But the thing to know about Sanusi, although he represents tradition as emir, he was also very moderate in his outlook. Sanusi believed in the education, still believes in the education of women. He believes in a modern approach to Islamic law that's not tied to the past, so much so that it disrupts things from being just right now. He believes in anti-corruption. There's so many progressive ideas. And as emir, he wanted to make sure that those ideas were in the public sphere. He also came in 2014, a very important time in Kano political history and the political history of Nigeria, because this is also the time of the Boko Haram uprisings that hit Kano extremely hard. 2014 was also the year, if you all remember, that those girls were kidnapped out of that school by Boko Haram, which made international news. Now, Boko Haram is a terrorist group. It's a terrorist group that follows a Salafist and Wahhabist version of Islam, a very traditional, conservative, I won't say even traditional, very conservative understanding of the Quran, a very, in most people's opinion, backwards understanding of the Quran. It would be as if Amish folks took over the Canadian government and tried to make everybody Amish. That's the equivalent. So their view, even the name Boko Haram, means Western education is harmful. And what they mean by Western education is anything that's not in the Quran, which, if you actually read the Quran, is absurd, because the Quran doesn't tell you that all knowledge in the world is located in the Quran. It doesn't say that anywhere at all. But anyway, that's their position. And because of what has been going on in the region, and you can kind of tell from this map, look where Kano sits. And this is an environmental map of Nigeria. It says Sudan savanna here, and it's growing. And in fact, the desert is advancing throughout Africa. You can look at this map here. So we're talking about this area in pink that you see. So things are drying up. Things are getting tight because of environmental change. So you have a lot of pastoralists, people with herds of animals clashing with farmers. Unemployment is high. You have a horrible economic situation in the region, and the federal government is not doing nearly as much as it should. This makes this area ripe for groups such as Boko Haram to recruit. They tell people, you know why you're suffering? You know why the crops aren't growing? Or you know why your herds aren't being able to get fed? It's because we've strayed away from the true teachings of the Quran. We've allowed moderates such as Sanusi and others to take us away from the true message of the Prophet. Therefore, you need to join Boko Haram. We need to connect with ISIS, because Boko Haram had a short alliance. They pledged allegiance to ISIS. They had tried to pledge allegiance to Al Qaeda at some point as well. So that's their view of Islam. We have to be just like the Arabs and others and practice this really strict version of the Quran. And they convince people to do that because people are looking at their lives and they're saying, yeah, you know, I need something to blame for my situation. So maybe it's because I strayed from the Quran. Maybe it's this, that. You got a lot of young men and even a lot of young women that join this movement that's become increasingly violent since its founding in the early 2000s. Kidnappings, suicide bombings, shootouts with not just military folks, but also civilians, killing civilians, burning down villages, so on and so forth, all over northern and northeast Nigeria. This is the hardest hit zone, and it fits perfectly with the environmental problems. They're interrelated. You can't separate one from the other. So he inherited that. In fact, the mosque associated with his palace was bombed in 2014, the same year that he becomes emir. This is one of the oldest mosques in Nigeria. So it's funny, you say that you are proponents of Islam, that you are trying to uphold the Quran, yet you're killing mostly Muslims, which is against the Quran, and you're bombing mosques, which of course is against the Quran. But this is the mentality of the folks that lead the cowards that lead Boko Haram, that kidnap girls and do all types of cowardly things. So he's dealing with all of this while pushing a progressive agenda, not only for Muslims, but also for Nigeria as a whole. He's critical of the government. So while he's doing this, the original governor that helped him become emir, because the governors play a really strong role. It's not like it is in the South, where you got traditional authorities in whether it's the Oba of Benin or it's the Alafin of Oyo. Those are pretty much chosen by traditional rulers. The government doesn't have traditional mechanisms. The government doesn't have a lot of say in that. But going back to the colonial era, going back to when the British had first subjugated, which we might talk about, that region, they created a system so that the traditional rulers had to follow whatever the colonial government said, and then later on, the Nigerian government. So a new governor comes into the state, and he's at odds with Sanusi. So one of the first things he does, he takes the emirate and creates 5 new emirates inside of Kano. So what used to be this man's entire realm has now been split up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate regions. And he only gets this, what you see in the dark purple. So the government just created new emirates and gave people titles, including the title for the son of the emir before. So that causes conflict. And so finally, this all comes to a head in 2020, and the governor removes Sanusi. Daniel, if you wouldn't mind, could you play that video of the governor explaining why he removed Sanusi?
You see, that was the work of a social critic. But when we came the era of Kano, he refused to change from that stature to the stature of a traditional ruler. He's an economist, but he failed to understand. In economics, you have to inherit assets and liability. But in economy, he only inherited the assets of the traditional institution by giving orders, staying in a mansion, dressing gorgeously, being addressed as a king. What's the liability of that institution? You have to watch your words. You have to watch your tongue. And you do that. That was a problem. That was the biggest problem. That he could not change his mode of life from social critique to an institution. As of now, that institution does not afford a social critic of this type. You will have problems with society. He was destroying the institution. This tank that you are seeing is a very dangerous comment in the body. In fact, even politicians, the greatest enemy of a politician is his tongue. Because you said something yesterday, and today you are contradicting yourself. That is your tongue. That is why God, in His mercy, decided to provide so many layers for the tongue. You have the lips, you have the teeth, in order to protect your tongue, and it is also left in a liquid so that it doesn't become brittle. All these are arrangements in order to have a break for the tongue. But Sanusi was able to break all the walls. Even the traditional rulers, they added another layer by covering it like this. Covering like this means don't talk anyhow. If you don't know, that is the meaning of this. Don't forget now. And that's why you had a problem with him. Yes, that's why you had a problem with him. He was destroying the institution. That was one thing. The second thing was that, you see, there is claim and the counter claim about the creation of emirates, the additional emirates in Kano. Abu Bakr attempted to create emirates. But unfortunately, Abu Bakr did not provide the legal backing to the emirates. And therefore, another governor came and changed it. So, because of public demand from those areas, that is one, demand from those areas. Two, because of history. Three, because of deepening and widening the role of traditional institutions in governance. That is very, very important. These three basic reasons, we decided to create more emirates. And we didn't create them just open like that. We followed history. We followed the demand of the people. We created the emirates. We challenged it in the court of law. When we said the law was wrong, we looked at the law. Yes, it's okay. We corrected the law. We went back to the court, challenging it. Now, how can the leader of a traditional institution coexist with a government in litigation all the time? It does look like you're planning to weaken his powers. Because I told you three reasons. Not weakening his powers. His powers are not more important than the development of the people. His powers are not more important than the aspirations of the people. His powers are not more important than the historical antecedents of this people.
All right, pause it, Daniel. Thank you. So this is what we're going to get into today. This is the question. The governor is using history as his argument. He's saying that, he wasn't living up to the historical role of the tradition, that the emir and the separation of the emirates is something that the people could traditionally do. Well, we're going to look at the tradition today. We're going to look at the history because it's important for us to do so. We might not find the answer to that specific question, but it's important for us to realize that this position is a very ancient position. So let's look at its foundations. Let's look at where we're at with it. So I'm going to turn it over to Daniel, and Daniel's going to tell you about the foundations of the history of this region from the time period that we're talking about. So Daniel, you take it away. And if you're talking, you're on mute. Okay.
Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So we're going to be talking today about Hausaland and Sokoto. So to get right into it, the Hausa are one of the largest ethnic groups in modern-day Nigeria, alongside the Yoruba and the Igbo peoples. Right now, they are predominantly Muslim. In pre-colonial times, a lot of them practiced African spirituality, but as of right now, that's not the case. They founded several walled fortified cities, some of the most important being Dauda, Gobir, Kano, and Katsina. Because they're in the north of Nigeria, they were able to build large cavalry-based militaries, and they wrote about their history in both Arabic and Ajami. Ajami is basically writing in an African language, but using the Arabic script to do so. So the origin of Hausaland is pretty interesting. Last week, we talked about the idea of Hebrews coming into West Africa from Asia and how that idea was very untenable. But according to the Hausa, their founding ancestor did come from the Middle East, which is a very interesting prospect. They say that their oldest ancestor was a man named Bayajida. They said that he came from Canaan, and from there he migrated into West Africa and settled in the kingdom of Kanem Bornu. But after getting into some disputes with the king of Kanem, he was forced to escape, and he and his pregnant wife migrated to a place called Dauda, where he asked for some water, and the people of the town told him that he couldn't get water until he killed the snake that was guarding their well. So he killed the snake that was guarding the well, and for this act of bravery, the queen of Dara took his hand in marriage. They had kids together, and these kids ended up becoming the rulers of the most important Hausa states, and these were Daura, Kano, Zauzau, Gobir, Katsina, and Reno.
What happened to the first wife?
Um,
I'm just
Traditions don't say. That happens a lot in African history. You see people moving a lot, so that's just the way that it was back then. So in order to talk about Hausa history, even though we're not talking about Europeans in this course, it's important to talk about this guy, Herbert Palmer, because a lot of the texts that we know on Hausa history and on Kanem Bornu come from translations that he provided and put into English. Herbert Palmer was a colonial administrator in Nigeria. He worked with a lot of locals and spent a lot of time collecting manuscripts from different families, different ulemas, different people of prominence in Hausa land and the rest of the Western Sudan. So some of his most important works are the Kano Chronicle, which we're going to talk about shortly, the Bornu Gurgum, the history of the first 12 years of the reign of Idris Aluma, Sudanese memoirs, and the Bornu Sahara in Sudan. And a lot of what these manuscripts are something called Gurgums, this word right here. And that comes from the Kanuri language, the language of Kanem Bornu, and that basically translates to mean a list of ancestors. So a lot of Hausa literature is what we would consider a king's list. A lot of Hausa manuscripts are more focused on telling the history of their kings than of the people in general. That's kind of a common trend that we see in Hausa literature. One of the most well-known works of Hausa literature is the Kano Chronicle. We're not sure who the author of it was, but we know that he wrote this work at some point during the 1800s. It chronicles the history of Kano from its founding in the 1000s all the way down to the time of the Fulani conquest of Hausa land, which we're going to get to shortly. The central themes of this work are the displacement of an indigenous community with a Muslim community, the introduction of Islam by Daula traders. The Daula were Mande people from the Mali Empire who would migrate across Africa and introduce Islam to non-Islamic peoples. And the construction of the Kano city walls, the very large fortification system that protected the city in pre-colonial times. So according to the Kano Chronicle, there were a lot of important events that the Kano people find culturally relevant. In pre-colonial times, the Aboriginal people worshiped a god that they called Chum Berberai, and he had a sacred grove called Kakwa, and in this grove there was a tree that they called Shamus. The chief of the Aboriginals was a man named Barbashe. He was the only person that was allowed to go in this garden without dying, because he was believed to be a spiritual adept and have special religious abilities. One day while he was in this garden, he had a vision that Kano would be taken over, and that their garden would be burnt and a mosque built over it. And after about a year's time, the people of Kano ended up getting taken over, and Muslims set up camp in their land. In 999 CE, we have the establishment of the Islamic dynasty of Kano, which still is reigning right now. Founder of this dynasty was a man named Dauda. From 1095 to 1134 CE, we have the reign of Kiji Masu, who was the third Sarki or Sultan of Kano. During his time, the Kano walls began their construction. During the reign of the fifth Sarki, Yusa, the Kano walls were completed. And during this time, shields were also used in warfare in Hausaland for the very first time. From 1307 to 1343, we have the reign of Samia, the ninth Sarki of Kano. During his time, an indigenous cult was practiced for the first time in the country. From 1349 to 1385, we have the reign of Sarkiocano, and it was during his time that the Dauda traders came into Hausaland. We're told that they came in about numbers of roughly 11 people, and the Dauda traders convinced Sarkiocano to observe the time of prayers and to build mosques in his country and profess Islam as his personal faith and to renounce the pagan religion. So he does that, and then he commands every town in Kano to do the same. So it's during his reign that Islam becomes very widespread in the country. From 1424 to 1438, we have the reign of Sarki Dauda. Nothing of importance happens in Kano at this time, but in the neighboring kingdom of Zaria, we have Queen Amina expanding her kingdom, and we're going to talk about her more shortly. During the reign of Abdullahi Burha, we have camels introduced for the first time in Hausaland. So we're going to watch a quick video about the Kano city walls, how they were built, and their current status in Nigeria right now. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up.
Before you renew Amazon Prime, watch this. Look, I love Amazon Prime. Free 2-day shipping is...
It's difficult to imagine that this is...
Oh, we can't see it.
But this don't...
You said you can't see the video?
No, we're still seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay, let me try that again. You see it now?
Yep.
It's difficult to imagine that this is anything but a swamp in the shadow of a mound. But this dump site where children pass time is part of Kano's centuries-old wall. A one-time unique example of ancient fortification that drew visitors from around the world and helped define and develop the city.
You feel a real sense of loss. Kano City Wall still has its own social value in terms of individual and collective identity. People in Kano identify themselves in relation to their location in the city.
Kano was the jewel of the seven walled cities that made up the Hausa Kingdom, a center for Islamic learning and scholarship. At its famed 15th century curvy market, the fusion of smells and colors tells the story of how merchants have flocked here from across the Sahara for generations. Kano's walls and gates helped protect it as a commercial hub as far back as the 12th century. The wall's circumference extended 20 kilometers, parts of it 8 meters thick and 11 to 12 meters high. But nature and man haven't been kind. Today, 80% of the wall is gone, something that has prevented it from being listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
It was at the foot of this hill that the city's third king first started building the wall. Visitors still come here every year for traditional ceremonies, as excavations keep finding ancient clay walls strewn across the site. But there are no guards or gates to protect it, not even a sign to mark it.
Withering too, the 500-year-old dye pits that produce the Sahara's trademark deep blue cloth, popular among tribesmen and tourists. Costs and competition from cheaper imported fabrics have taken a toll on this craft. Many of the pits are no longer functional. 75-year-old Dauda and others soldier on.
This is what I've been doing all my life. I inherited it from my father, and he inherited it from his. I passed it on to 5 of my children to stop the trade from dying.
As the city's heritage slowly fades, there have been humble conservation attempts. The US and Germany have contributed to restoring parts of the wall. The Emperor's ancient palace, still inhabited by the current honorary ruler, is regularly maintained. But many say officials have been more occupied with giving the city a facelift, modern structures replacing the last physical reminders of the glorious past. Al Jazeera, Kano, northern Nigeria.
Okay, so that was just a quick video about the Kano city walls. And we briefly mentioned Queen Amina, so we're gonna watch a short video about her. And then we're gonna go ahead and do our first Q&A. So let me go ahead and open that. All right, can we see the video?
Yep.
Okay.
There are only a few African queens that come to our attention during the medieval period in West Africa, but none of these queens shine as bright as the West African queen of Zaria. Queen Amina was not only the greatest African queen of West Africa, but one of the greatest queens in African history altogether. What up, African Royal Swims here, and I'm back at it with another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And as always, if you want to support the home team, you can do so on patreon.com. I have some rewards for you guys, so be sure to check that out. Also, go to afrographics.com, a website where you can find unique illustrative infographics summarizing African history. All links to Patreon, Afrographics, and home team merchandise are in the description box below. To begin to understand Queen Amina, we must first understand a little about where she came from, the Hausa state of Sahel. The old walled town of Zaria was the capital of the traditional Zaria Emirate, formerly Zazal or Zegzeg. The historic kingdom is said to date from the 11th century CE, when King Gunguma founded it as one of the original Hausa Bakwai, or 7 true Hausa states. Zaria was probably founded in 1536, and later in the century became the capital of the Hausa state of Zazal. Both the town and state were named after Queen Zaria, the late 16th century queen, the younger sister and successor of Queen Amina. Camel caravans from the northern Sahara came there to trade, and Islam was introduced in about 1456. So who is Queen Amina? Queen Amina was a Hausa Muslim and was known as a skilled military strategist and conqueror. Oral tradition includes many stories about Queen Amina, but scholars generally agree that the stories are based on a real person who ruled in that region. The actual date of her rule is debated, but most agree that she ruled in either the 15th or 16th century. One of the earliest sources that mention Queen Amina outside of oral history is a map made by the Portuguese called the Planisphere of Domingos, which was made in 1573 and names a place in Africa called Castelo de Mina, or the Castle of Amina. Her father, King Turunku, and her mother, Queen Bakwa, were the 22nd king and queen to rule in Zaria. After her parents died, her brother became king, and Princess Amina served as a leading warrior in her brother's cavalry and gained a lot of attention and notoriety for her military skills. It was after the death of her brother that Queen Amina became sole ruler of Zazal. Amina controlled many of the trade routes in the region and conquered as far as Nupe in the south and Kwarafa. She's believed to have trained her own cavalry, and she built walled forts around each area that she conquered, which she named Ganuwar Amina, meaning Amina's walls. The city of Zaria itself was encompassed by over 10 miles of walls. A well-regarded and detailed history of the city of Kano, composed in the late 19th century, called the Kano Chronicle, says the following about Queen Amina. Every state paid her tribute. The king of Nupe sent her 40 male servants and 10,000 colonels. In her time, all the products of the West came to Hausaland. Queen Amina is credited with establishing metal armor amongst her army. She was said to wear metal armor herself. Her army also incorporated iron helmets and chainmail, which protected her soldiers well against various African armies, who may have been lacking such protection, ensuring their effectiveness. Only 3 months after being crowned queen, Amina waged a 34-year campaign against her neighbors, meant to expand Sahel's territory. Her army is said to have consisted of well-trained foot soldiers, numbering around 20,000, and also consisting of 1,000 cavalry troops. Muhammad Bello, the Fulani Sultan of the Sokoto Empire, has this to say about Queen Amina. Strange things have happened in the history of the 7 Hausa states, and most strange of these is the extent of the possessions which God gave to Aminatu, daughter of the ruler of Zazal. She waged war in the Hausa lands and took them all, so that the men of Katsina and the men of Kano brought her tribute. She made war in Bachi and against the other towns of the south and the west, so that her possessions stretched down to the shores of the sea. Even though the Hausa kingdoms developed before the reign of Amina, the Sultan of Sokoto still credits her for establishing statehood amongst the Hausa people. According to the Kano Chronicle, Queen Amina ruled for 34 years, which allowed her to expand her influence and create trade relations with North Africa. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you like this video and want to help out in it.
Okay, so that was
All right.
just a little introduction I heard. So Clyde, I'm gonna hand it back over to you now.
All right, let's go into our first Q&A. So does anybody have any questions for myself or Daniel? You can put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Daniel, anything in the chat?
Okay, somebody was asking, can you clarify what you mean by the first indigenous cult was practiced? Okay, yes. So after the establishment of the Islamic dynasty in Kano, most of the Sarkis were Muslim, even if it was only in name. And so that Sarki that adopted the indigenous cult, what I mean by that is he was the first Sarki to openly practice something that wasn't Islam, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And even going back to our map here to make this make sense, and Daniel is great to allude that a lot of folks, a lot of leaders in the region, this one, adopted Islam earlier than the masses of the people. For most of West Africa, most everyday people didn't become Muslim until the 18th and 19th century, like the everyday masses of people, even though you had a number of Muslim leaders throughout West Africa. The leaders would become Muslim, often nominally Muslim, in order to have connections to these trade routes. Becoming Muslim gave you an advantage in trade with the folks in the Sahara that were Muslim, the folks further east in Sudan who were Muslim. So it's a business move. In addition to being a spiritual move, for a lot of the leaders, it's a business move to connect you to these trade routes. But as we'll talk about in the second half of this class, it's not until the jihads of the 18th and 19th century that everyday populations of people start to become Muslim further south of the Sahara. And the same thing actually happened earlier in the north, whether we're talking about among the Amazigh or the Berber folks. It was the leadership first, then it trickled down into the people. And even doing so, because of this, you have throughout West Africa, and Nigeria included, you have African versions of Islam, which with heavy Sufi elements or mystical elements and interpretations of Islam that are different than the way Islam is practiced other places in the world, which is one of the reasons why Boko Haram has their ideas the way that they are. They want the African versions of Islam to be stamped out, and they want Africans to adopt a Wahhabist Islam that emerged out of, and Salafist Islam that emerged out of Saudi Arabia, which is not even the Saudi Arabia of Muhammad, but a more modern understanding of what true Islam is supposed to be, is the best way. I know that's kind of a contradiction, but yeah. So That's very much correct. A lot of these leaders adopted Islam as a business move, an economic move, a political move, in addition to a spiritual one. Definitely. Anything else in the chat, Daniel?
There's nothing else in the chat, and I don't see any more hands.
Any questions? Any hands? Oh, we got one.
Oh, Ananda, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, how does that relate to people joining Islam, because then they wouldn't have to be paying taxes?
Yeah, that's what gets a lot of people too, especially in the early. We're going to talk about that. Well, Daniel might talk about that, but in the Sokoto Caliphate, that was also a big thing. People joined because, yeah, they didn't want to pay taxes. But that's really big up north during the initial expansion of Islam into Africa. Many people became Muslim, at least nominally, to not have to pay the tax to practice their religion. So that exists as well.
Yeah, I don't talk about that for Sokoto, but if you actually read the Kano Chronicle, and I could put that on the course website, they do talk about those taxes in there. In Islam, that tax is called a jizya, and that's basically a tax that you have to pay if you're a non-Muslim living in a Muslim-controlled area, simply for not being
Muslim.
for not being Muslim. So, yeah, just wanted to add that in there.
Very good. Very good. All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. So go ahead, Daniel. You can tell us about Sokoto.
All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so now we're going to be talking about the Fulani people and the Sokoto Caliphate, which is this area right here, which occupied much of northern Nigeria and which extended into Niger and part of Cameroon. So the people that founded Sokoto were the Fulani, and unlike the Hausa or the Yoruba or or even the Igbo people, the Fulani don't have a history of state building because the Fulani have historically never been a settled people. They are very agro-pastoral, so they move with their herds a lot. And so we don't really see the Fulani ever become a major power in Africa until the establishment of Sokoto in the early 1800s, thanks to this ancestor right here, Uthman Dan Fodio. Dan Fodio was a religious figure. He initiated a series of jihads that ravaged much of West Africa during the 19th century. He founded Sokoto, and he brought most of Hausa land under Fulani control. He was born in the village of Marada on December 15, 1754, and his family later moved to Dago in Hausa land, where he grew up and spent most of his life. His father was an imam, and so from him, he was reared into Islamic culture and taught how to be a devotee. It was from his father that he learned how to read and write, and it was from him that he learned how to recite the Quran. According to people who knew him personally, he was described as tall, slender, and light-skinned with a very small beard, and he was also said to have a very strong interest in human psychology. As a young man, he was educated at Islamic schools. Many of the teachers that he had at these schools were relatives from his own clan, and so oftentimes he would be educated by his own family. His uncle Binduri was the most influential teacher on him, and he also had another relative named Muhammad Sambo who taught him how to read legal texts. According to his brother Abdullah B. Muhammad, Uthman Dan Fodio started his missionary work at the age of 20, which would have been around 1774. He began preaching in Dago, where he started to build a reputation as a well-known religious figure. So he started to do his missionary work all across Hausa land. When he got to the kingdom of Gobir, the Sarkey Bawa Jangwarzo was allowing his citizens to practice African spirituality. He himself was a Muslim, and again, if only in name, but he allowed most of his citizens to continue practicing their indigenous religious system. So Uthman dan Fodio explained to him what it meant to be a real Muslim and that a real Muslim wouldn't permit such practices to continue under his dominions. And so he was successful in converting the Sarki and his people to Islam. After leaving Gobir, he spent 5 years doing missionary work in Zamfara. And then between 1789 and 1804, he started to experience a lot of visions where he would proclaim to have seen the Prophet Muhammad personally. And it was from these that he would really begin to become convinced that he was destined to spread the faith of Islam and to be a very important political figure. So as his influence grew, the kings of Gobir began to perceive him as a threat. They forbade him from preaching in their country anymore, and they launched a very violent and bloody military assault against him. He in turn responded by launching his own jihads against Hausa, the first of which started in 1804. And since he spent a lot of his time growing up becoming a missionary and spreading his influence, he was able to have a lot of people side with him militarily, which was of great advantage. Amongst his greatest supporters were his brother Abdullah and his son Muhammad Bello. And while all of this is happening, he has a daughter named Nana Asma'u. And while he was launching a series of bloody wars, she was more focused on spreading Islamic culture through literature and through art. So Nana Asma'u was born on November 11th, 1793. She was taught Islamic culture by her father, by her aunt Aisha, and by her half-brother Muhammad Bello. She was fluent in many languages. She knew how to speak Arabic, Fulani, and Hausa fluently, and she spoke a little bit of Tamajek, which, if I'm not mistaken, is an Amazi language. She married a man named Jidado Dan Lima in 1808 when she was 15 years old, and she wrote poetry on a variety of subjects related to Islam, many of which included the role of women within Islamic society. And so we're going to look at just one of her poems very quickly. Let me pull that up. Okay, so we're just going to look at one of her poems because most of them are very long. So we're just going to look at her short one, Remembrance of the Prophet. And so she says, I give
Daniel, before you start reading, could you zoom in a little bit more on the one that you're reading, if it's possible?
Is that better?
Maybe two more. Yeah, there it is. That's good.
Okay, so she says, I give thanks to God for the Prophet Muhammad, leader of mankind who has seen God face to face. Your appearance on earth has benefited man, you outshine all others, and your attributes far exceed those of other mortals. Other prophets were sent to prepare for you. The whole earth has been enhanced by your coming. The angels themselves assisted you at Badr. You are the chosen one, and I fly to your side. Help me, no praise is enough for you. Man will be exhausted before the praises he brings will suffice. No one can be compared to you. No hero ever achieved 1/10 of your heroism. No benefactor your beneficence. The Quran was revealed to you. Wild animals have spoken of you, and trees have rooted themselves to come to you. Wells have filled up and bitter water have become sweet because of you. The chip of wood cried when it had to be cleared to make the mosque you wanted. The clouds rushed to make a shade for you. You put your hand over the container and filled it with water in the battle and during Ramadan. You healed Atifku and humiliated Ubayu, spearing him and causing him to howl. Your valor is unsurpassed. Your marvelous works are too numerous to count. Save me from evil. Let me learn from you. Protect me so that I might at last find rest in paradise. So that's just to give you an example of some of the type of subjects that she would write about. And to close this out, we're going to watch one more video about this one's going to be about Sokoto. So let me open that and share my screen. All right, can everybody see the video?
Yep.
If you see you're safe, you can register to vote online right now. It only takes.
Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Patel. Welcome to another episode of Basic Nigerian History. Also guys, if you don't know by now, if you go to www.patreon.com/running creative, you will be able to join and become a member of our Patreon community where you can support us and get access to exclusive stuff such as behind the scenes and so on. So do that and we will very much appreciate it. Love you. Now, last episode, we spoke about the abolishment of slavery. In this episode, we're going to revisit the ethnic groups we previously mentioned and discuss what was going on in their lands during this period. Let's begin. We will begin with the Hausa's kingdom's transition to Sokoto Caliphate. Now, this happened between 1804 and 1903. Last time we were at this story, we left the story on February 21st, 1804, when Yunus declared war on his previous teacher, Usman dan Fodio. And in return, dan Fodio declared his own jihad. The war kicked off, and by 1808, the forces of dan Fodio had captured Katsina, Dauda, Kano, and Gober. It wasn't even very good for Yoruba. In 1809, Mohammed Bello, the son of dan Fodio, founded the city of Sokoto, and by 1810, Usman dan Fodio had brought together all the previously warring Hausa states and made Islam widespread, eradicating what he called pagan beliefs in an attempt to recreate the society established under the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad. They also took some provinces that had previously been under Borno Empire. The decline of the Borno Empire after 1759 and the constant infighting between the remaining kingdoms allowed for this to be possible. By 1812, war with Borno reached a stalemate. Immediately after the Sokoto Caliphate was complete, dan Fodio abdicated his leadership position to focus on spiritual and scholarly matters. Technically, he was still Caliph, or Shehu as it was most commonly called, but just by name. He left his sons and his brother in charge. Mohammed Bello, who was his son, ruled the west side of the empire by the capital of Sokoto, and Abdullahi, who was his brother, ruled the east side of the empire. The Caliphate continued to expand gradually, adding emirates to the south and the southeast. In 1817, dan Fodio died, and his son Bello became Caliph. He had to develop the administrative mechanism in order to rule the Caliphate. The Sokoto Caliphate was not particularly stable, if we're going to be honest. Leaders that had supported dan Fodio during his war became rulers of provinces they had conquered. In fact, in many cases, the ruler was replaced with himself. All he had to do was say, dan Fodio, I support you, I'm down with you, and was left alone. The Caliphate was more or less a collection of decentralized provinces called emirates, each ruled by almost entirely independent emirs. An example of the cracks that started appearing was a man called Abdul al-Salam, one of dan Fodio's followers that had instigated the jihad in the beginning. In 1817, after the death of dan Fodio, Abdul al-Salam was unhappy with the small amount of territory given to him, so he rebelled, but he was eventually soundly defeated and killed. Bello developed new administrative systems. He introduced coffers to help with communications between emirates and the Caliphate. They basically acted in the same capacity as the Ilani did for the empire, but they didn't spark like the Ilani. He chose people from his entourage with religious convictions to be coffers so that they could be trusted. He also placed ribats, which were house garrisons for the military, on the frontier of the Caliphate as well as the inside. This was in order to show people the power and protection of the Caliphate. Ulama were appointed by him to preach, teach, and help the people in Islam. making it easier for all citizens to become familiar with Islam. The Caliphate had no shortage of enemies, from the territory disputes with Borno in the east to the battling and defeating the Hausa kings of Gobe and Kebbi, who were still fighting from the north, not to mention the southern Emirates were still trying to take the holy war, the jihad, further south. And of course, there was internal conflicts because not all the rulers that changed to Islam changed for religious reasons. Some of them just did it because it was a politically wise thing to do. By the 1830s, the Sokoto Caliphate had expanded greatly, including parts of Nupe land, Junkun land, Yoruba land, like Ilorin, and at its peak, it stretched from Burkina Faso all the way to Cameroon. However, in 1837, Bello died, and this signifies the end of the Caliphate's religious motivation. Everybody returned to their materialistic and naturally greedy ways. Internal tensions and conflicts begin to grow as the Caliph struggles to keep order. An example is 1848, when Buhari became the Emir of Adija, which was previously part of Borno. In an attempt to keep power at any cost, this Buhari guy ruthlessly begins killing primary political opponents. When summoned by the ruling Caliph, Ali Baba, he refused and denounced the Caliph. He then ran north to get support from Borno. From 1851 to 1863, Emir Buhari of Adija remained in open rebellion to the Caliph. In 1851, he even attacks and reclaims Adija with the help of Borno, and then proceeded to terrorize and assault neighboring emirates. The Caliph tried and failed to oust him multiple times, but he eventually died in 1863, and Adija then came back to the Sokoto Caliphate. But that wasn't the only case where rebellion happened, because from 1893 to 1895, another rebellion occurred. This time, the rebellion was the rebellion of Yusuf bin Abdullah, which started the Kano Civil War. So I'll tell you the story very quickly. In 1893, Yusuf was elected by his people to be the new emir, but the ruling caliph at that time, Abdurrahman, refused and chose someone else, a man named Tokar. Okay, the people weren't happy, and neither was Yusuf. They all left to Takai to set up their own government. Abdurrahman then ordered military action, but no army, no emir was willing to take action against Yusuf because they thought Yusuf would make a good emir. They thought it was right for Yusuf to have been an emir. It was a wrong decision to choose this man called Tokar. In 1894, Yusuf defeated Tokar and his army, but unfortunately, he died. His brother Aliyu continued his fight and recaptured Kano fully in 1895. Abdurrahman, who was the caliph, was able to save face and appoint Aliyu as emir because Tokar was also dead and Yusuf was dead. So he was like, okay, at least Yusuf didn't become emir, so they're still listening to me. However, it wasn't all doom and gloom for the Sokoto Caliphate. There was also some positives, such as economic benefits. The Hausa states could now trade freely with each other without fear of raids and war because they were regulated by the same political system and body. There were also cultural benefits. Everyone identified as Muslims first and then as a citizen of their local emirates second. Furthermore, the Caliphate's revamped an education in Arabic literacy, as well as the Hausa people's legal customs infused with Islamic justification, gave the impression of living in an Islamic state. Sharia was one of the options for solving disputes. It wasn't the only one, but it was one of many options. And the emirs were allowed to choose if they wanted to enforce it or not. And if they did choose to enforce it, they were given leeway to do so as they saw fit. Basically, it was very culturally united. The political structure, however, was still not very Islamic. None of the Islamic reforms that Fodio campaigned for was implemented. Even the ones that Fodio got rid of eventually came back. For example, the taxes and the tributes. Slavery continued, and actually slavery increased after the death of Fodio and his son. Sokoto was willing to accept slavery as a tribute, and theological debates kicked off on what was acceptable Islamic practice and what wasn't. Many Hausa people thought the Caliphate was more of an ethnic takeover by the Fulani instead of a religious reform. And you couldn't really blame them because all but one of the first emirs were Fulani. However, in all of the writings of Fodio and Bello, no ethnicity was mentioned. So it can be safely concluded, I think, that their original goal was Islamic change and not an ethnic takeover. By the 1900s, the Sokoto Caliphate had about 2.5 million non-Muslim slaves, second only to South America, which had roughly 4 million. However, slavery in the Sokoto Caliphate, just like in the rest of the Muslim world, was not exactly chattel slavery. And there was less of a distinction between slaves and masters. We have many historical records of slaves reaching high levels in government and administration in the Sokoto Caliphate. But eventually, the British defeated and annexed it in 1903. However, let's not get ahead of ourselves because we will discuss that in detail in a future episode.
All right, I don't want to
All
turn
right.
it over to you now.
Thanks, Dan. And that is really where we'll stop for today and stop our seminar. We'll conclude by wrapping this up by saying when we look at everything we've talked about over the past 3 weeks, and we look at where Nigeria is today in 2022, celebrating Independence Day, it's important for us to look back at all of this and even the stuff that we didn't talk about. We only had 4 weeks. And as I mentioned at the beginning, Nigeria is a country of over a quarter of a billion people, almost a quarter of a billion people. It's a giant of Africa. You can't encapsulate its history in a 4-week seminar. It's not possible. It takes at least a semester to do half of Nigerian history, if we're going to call it that. Whether we're talking about the history of Yoruba land, you can spend a lifetime studying that. Igbo land, same thing. Hausa land, all of this and everything in between. You know, we didn't really get to talk a lot about the Middle Belt. We didn't get to talk a lot about the Ijaz and the Igalas and the Ibibios. So there's a lot of information still out there. But what we wanted to do was just kind of highlight some important things to show the possibility of what could be done. This was just Nigeria. There's 54 other countries in Africa. We got so many countries in the diaspora, so many different ethnic groups, so many different nations whose history we need to talk about. And that's the goal of these sessions, is to bring just a taste of this out so that it probably can influence some younger people or anybody, not just young people, anybody, to continue to do this research so that we can bring all these stories together. And not just to talk about them and feel good and learn different things. It's fun to learn, that's one thing. But learn and to actually do better. Because as we look at the problems that Nigeria has, the same problems that we could say all of African people have, and frankly the world, problems of environmental destruction, problems of corruption, which is nothing, it's not just a Nigerian problem, it's a Canadian problem too. How many times we hear about MPs and other folks getting involved in something they ain't supposed to get involved in? And we don't got to talk about the US, it's full of corruption. When we look at the economic practices, what are the best economic practices? When we look at how we can create societies where religion is something that uplifts people and makes society better, and it's not something that is influencing people to commit acts of atrocity. We can look back at the history of our various peoples, see the lessons that were taken, the actors and the decisions that they made to help us make better decisions as we move forward. That's what all this is about. So I'm glad that you were able to join us, and I hope that you join us for our next session. Our next course is going to be our Shiro's course. We have it every year. It's an 8-week course that mentions women such as Queen Zari and others who defended their kingdoms or their people, and we get into more modern times, from external aggression and internal contradictions. So we're going to be dealing with various Shiros over the next 8 weeks. So come back, join us. Those course websites will be always updated where you can go get information about the things that we've talked about, go deeper, teach yourself, teach others, share this information, and we'll be back every Saturday doing the same thing. So thank you all for being here. Any questions before we close out? And we got about maybe 10 to 12 minutes for questions or community announcements. Anything in the chat?
When does the Heroes course start? Because next week is Thanksgiving weekend.
We start next week.
Okay.
If folks could join us, please do. It'll be recorded. So even if you can't, okay, so yeah, we'll be here. So even if folks can't make it, it'll be recorded.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Daniel, anything in the chat?
No, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Norma, go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Danielle and Clyde, for the presentation. I haven't joined you for a while, been crazy busy, but I also wanted to let folks know how we're, and I use the word we very loosely, are advancing with the Black Class Action Suit. The federal government has been stalling, and the leaders of the Black Class Action Suit have asked for my support as the Vice President of the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada. They also asked for the support of the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, and they also got the support of MP from Hamilton, Mr. Green, to support us. They got the international support of Amnesty International, the Secretary General for Canada for Amnesty International, Madame Katie, and I'm forgetting her last name. We all had a press conference this week on Parliament Hill and announced the advancement of the complaint with respect to the Black Class Action Suit to the international committees, and in particular to the United Nations. So I just wanted everybody here to be aware of what we've been doing. And, you know, this is basically us saying we're not going to stand for stalling techniques. We want advancement of the complaints of our Black federal government workers and some provincial workers, and we need action. So that's the latest. I would encourage you to go to my Facebook page, Norma Dome, and that's Domey, and like and comment if you wish, so that we can amplify this very important news. And this is huge. I also have a Twitter account. It's basically my last name and then my first name. So @Domain Norma, and it is just below my pinned tweet. So I encourage those on Twitter to also support by liking and retweeting. And I hope to get it on LinkedIn later today. So you can also find us on there and accelerate this. The young man who's actually leading this, that's why I said we very loosely, because I'm just supporting, is Nicholas Marcus Thompson. And he's currently the executive director for the Black Class Action Secretariat. So it's a secretariat that has taken this to the United Nations. So I want everybody to be aware, and I hope to that you will also let other folks know to amplify our message through social media by liking and commenting there as well. So this is success. We don't often, as Black folks and folks from other ethnic groups, celebrate our successes. So I wanted to cheerlead on behalf of the Secretariat all the amazing work that they've been doing. So kudos to Nicholas and folks, and also for the NDP leader. And I also want to say that I was on the LinkedIn and saw some of the comments, and one of them was from the NDP leader, sort of, you know, a negative comment saying, yeah, but you're not Black. Folks, we need as many allies as we can get. And, he does belong to, he is a visible minority, and we have to work as a team in eradicating discrimination. So I hope that folks will comment on his comment, because it's not right. When we look for support, when we look for allyship within the ranks, we need to have one voice, and that is everyone is a human being and should not be discriminated against. So I'll leave it there, Clyde, and if anybody has any comments, you can also reach me at normadome@outlook.com.
Thank you so much, Ms. Norma. It's good to hear your voice, and thank you for that update and the work that you all are doing. Any other hands or questions, comments, announcements, community announcements? I can let everybody know that at our Chocolate Convent, our next mentorship meeting will be next month, October 29th. So if you know any young people that looking for mentorship or interested in connecting with other student leaders, that's going to be Saturday, October 29th at the Bronson Center at 2:30 p.m. Food will be served, and we'll be having a community building session discussing the state of Black brothers in Ottawa. That'll be our topic. So that's next month. A lot of things are going on in the community. We'll constantly keep you updated. We are going to close it out today, so I have to go to my brother-in-law's wedding. So we'll stop there for today. Thank you all again, and we will talk soon.